It was about 9 years ago that I auditioned for American Idol, but not by choice, actually. My wife and some friends had been begging me to audition for years. It was never quite my thing. I always enjoyed singing. Music has been a huge part of my life from when I was very little to even now. But just something about it, something about the way they treated people on there just didn't sit right with me. But my wife was very persistent. And so I told her, okay, fine. But it has to happen like this. I'm now too old to audition, so they have to raise the age next year. I don't want to travel, so it has to be in Nashville. And I don't want to look at Simon, so he has to leave the show. Wouldn't you know it, every single one of those things happened, and the next thing I knew, I was registered to go try out for American Idol. And the day drew closer, and my brother said he'd go with me, and I just was dragging my feet on it, and the Saturday of the audition rolls around. And my wife's like, aren't you excited to go? And I said, no, not really. She's like, but you gotta do it. You told me you would. I really don't want to. She's like, okay, well, I'm going to see the new Twilight movie. If you remember, that's the one with the sparkly vampires that's really popular with 12-year-old girls. If you don't go audition, you have to go watch the movie with me. So I got in a car and drove straight to Nashville and stood in line for 12 hours to audition and made it all the way through. There's 4 auditions before you ever get to see the judges and the TV round. Made it all the way through the TV round and had a weird out-of-body experience. I get out there on the platform, and the judges were there, and they were lit perfectly. It was almost as if they were still on TV, and I was in this weird place on stage, and Randy was there, and I should have been staring at J-Lo, but Steven Tyler was there. Dude looks like a lady. I'm just gonna... But one of my heroes is sitting there, and I'm just like, I don't get starstruck often, but it was as if I was out of my body watching the audition from the side. And it didn't go horribly. They didn't make fun of me or anything, but I didn't make it to TV. But my wife and my parents who were there for the audition were on TV like 4 times. So I was a little upset that I waited in line for 12 hours and went through 4 auditions, and they're the ones that get all the recognition on TV. But music has been integral to my life. Singing since, I was this old, but now that I have 2 kids, and both of them, I can literally say that they were singing before they could speak. Avery will sit behind me in the car on the way to school and back, and he's either singing Twinkle Twinkle, the ABCs, or Baa Baa Black Sheep. I'm not sure. It's all the same melody, so it's one of those 3, and I'm so proud of them. Music does something for us, though. It's interesting the power that music has. Like if anybody in here is married and they hear that song from their wedding, maybe it was the song you first danced to, you are instantly transported back in time to that moment, and you can live that out. It takes us places. Maybe it reminds us of a better time, and for all the good and bad that came out of what has been termed the worship wars as churches moved away from hymnals and went more praise and worship, the argument that always rung the best with me is people were so passionate about some of these songs because that was the moment they got saved. They remember meeting Jesus for the first time when that song was playing, and so it means something so deep to them that I don't think we need to forget too quickly. And the thing I'm wondering is if 30 years from now, we're going to be sitting around asking, like, why aren't they playing Hillsong anymore? Where's the Chris Tomlin? Anyway, but music does those things for us. Like, it pumps us up. It engages all of our emotions. You notice, like, when football players are walking out of the tunnel or they're warming up, they've got their headphones on, like, they're not listening to Air Supply or James Taylor, They're not soft rocking their way into motivation, but Broncos probably need to pick a better playlist, though, I will say that. Browns too, the Browns too, absolutely. But music does something for us. It engages our emotions. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. So when Brian asked me to preach, he said, I'm going to give you the subject of worship for the Your Part Matters series. And I got so excited, right? So I've been worship leading professionally for 15 years now. My undergraduate's in worship. My master's is in worship. I'm like, we're going to be here till tomorrow. I've got so much information to say. That all came crashing down last night when I felt like we had a great service I felt like I preached well, it connected well, and a friend of mine comes up to me on the way out and says, "Hey man, great job." I said, "Oh, thanks." He goes, what are you doing tonight, like at 8 o'clock? I don't know why. He's like, "My daughter fell asleep so hard during your sermon. Could you come over and help put her to bed?" Like, all of this stuff came crashing down in that moment. I'm like, oh man, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But we're here talking about worship, and I wanna debunk this idea that is a little unfortunate in our culture, that worship is just music. Right? There's been an entire industry built on this idea of worship music. You know, there's albums being sold and concerts put on, and there's worship bands that are touring and doing all these things. But music is just one small aspect of what it means to truly worship. It's important. It's very important. It's why we reserve time in each service to come together and sing. Music is powerful. It changes us not just emotionally, but actually physiologically as well. There was a study done on large groups of singers all singing the same song together. Started with small choirs, and they worked the study up to larger and larger groups. When a large group sings the same song together, over a little bit of time in that song, their heartbeats begin to sync up. So when we gather on a Sunday morning or Saturday night and we begin to sing these songs together, there is something that is happening, not just emotionally, not just connecting beyond ourselves, but we are actually being transformed into one voice. Our heartbeats are beginning to line up. We're invited to sing this song that has been being sung since the beginning of time. The song of praise, the song of worship that from the day one has been being sung, and we're invited in to join our heartbeats together with it, to give worship to a holy God, a God set apart that invites us in to that story. The literal definition of the word worship is to give something worth. So when we say we worship something, we're saying we give that thing or that person or that entity worth. It is valuable to us. It is so valuable we are arranging our lives around it. We worship it. And you tend to become like what you worship. If you worship money, you start to shift to where you're always thinking about how to make the next dollar, how to make more, how to get more, how to get richer. If you worship power, you become a little more ruthless each day, trying to gain more and more power. And the hope is, as people of faith that believe in Jesus and believe in this God that extended this grace to us, that when we orient our lives and worship Him, we begin to slowly change more and more like Jesus. That is why we place Jesus on the throne of our worship. That is why we worship and say He is worthy. Because we're joining in with that song that's been being sung from the dawn of creation till now. We're joining our heartbeats together to say that this God is worthy of our praise and our attention, and this God is somebody that we want to orient our lives around. In Psalm 19, we read this: "The heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the skies display His craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make Him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth, and their words to all the world." There's a song being sung by everything around us that is giving praise and giving worship to this God that we serve and that we follow. And we are invited in, not as flies on a wall to watch from a distance or watch from the side, but we are invited to participate in this song so that our heartbeats are aligning with that of not just us in the room and people of faith, but with that of God. Singing together it reminds us and it reorients us to the truth of what we're created for and what we're created to be part of. It's a shared vision of the humanity that we were created to be and moving towards. We are invited in and participating in the renewal of all things. Singing is an important part of that. But real worship doesn't begin with the first note. It begins with the first step. Worship begins with the first step and not the first note. It's more than just the music we play. It's that first move towards God. It's more than a specific moment. It's a changing of our minds and our practices and our understanding. And essentially, it is the why behind all the questions of, it's the answer to why behind all the questions of what we do. It is to worship. It is to orient ourselves together as a faith family and orient ourselves together to God. We read this in Exodus. This is a kind of an interesting passage, and I hope maybe this week you grab a Bible and read all of Exodus 15, but I want to focus in on this little part, is what's called the Song of Miriam. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." What's interesting about this is, one, they're actually praising God for killing people, which is a little strange, but we can, there's a bunch of chariots buried under the Red Sea now. The other thing that's interesting is this may be one of the first recorded times we have of actual worship and music coming together in one spot. Miriam singing a song that she's so grateful that God has delivered them from Egypt that she can't help it, bubbles over to where she just grabs a tambourine and starts dancing and singing. We are so glad when you come every weekend, but please don't bring your own tambourines. Something happened where Miriam just could not contain her gratefulness, that she had to do something, and it bubbled over into this moment of praise where music and song came together. It was born out of this idea of gratefulness. That was the first step, not the first note. Worship happened throughout that entire thing. There's another story in Luke. This one maybe takes a left turn at first, but let's talk about and break it down how I think this applies to what we're talking about. As he went, the crowds pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years, and though she had spent all she had on physicians, no one could cure her. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Then Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" When the woman saw that she could not remain hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and now she had been immediately healed. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So the scene here is Jesus is walking through this very dense, crowded area. There are people all around. And this woman, who recognizes that she has a deep need for what Jesus offers, fights and claws her way through this crowd just to get close enough to touch the hem of his garment. Her worship started at the first step towards Jesus, not the moment afterwards where she was so grateful it bubbled over into a testimony. All of that is worship, but it started at the first step when she recognized a need that nothing else could fulfill. She'd spent all her money on physicians. She had tried everything else she could do in order to get better, in order to fix this problem. But the moment she took that first step towards Jesus and fought and clawed her way to him, worship began. She reoriented her entire life around something new and something different, and it changed her. And her testimony to other people of why she did it changed people as well. It is important that we are grateful and we remember what God has done for us. In the Song of Miriam, that God has delivered us out of something, but it's also important to remember what God is currently doing. He's still in the business of saving people and healing people and doing miracles. And those are all great and well, but that moment of worship starts when we move towards that, not when it happens. In Psalm 71, we read, "I will shout for joy as I sing your praises. My soul will celebrate because you have rescued me." There's a lot of psalms that are written and categorized different ways, but one of my favorite is called a Psalm of Lament, and it generally starts with almost like a handshaking at God of like, "Where were you in my darkest time? And are you even there? Do you even care?" But then there's always this moment where it shifts, I think, a little bit. There's this phrase, "But I remember." I remember what you've brought us through. I remember what you've brought me through. I remember how you delivered our people out of Egypt, and for that I am still grateful. And those Psalms of Lament boil over into a psalm of praise. And if we're going to be true about who we are and we're going to understand that this next thing, that worship is a lifestyle, then we also have to understand that God can handle a little handshaking. He can handle our pain. He can handle our doubts. He can handle our anger. And a lifestyle of worship allows us to bring that all to Him. There's nothing we leave out. Otherwise, we kind of become like the plastic smile where it's just all good. It's all fine. We show up to church. How you doing today? I'm good. And then you go your separate ways, right? Worship is a lifestyle. It's something that encompasses all of who we are. And when we orient our life in this lifestyle, when we reorient our life towards Jesus and move towards Him, we understand because we are made in the image of God, when we worship the living God, we are actually becoming more and more truly human. And in order to do that, we have to be aware we can bring everything to the table in our acts of worship. It's a lifestyle. It's a lived out in practice and deed, and we gather in our services to kind of reframe and reorient ourselves again week after week to this life of faith, to this man named Jesus, to this life that He has showed us how to live, so that when we scatter out of this place, there's something that just bubbles from inside out that people know that person was with Jesus. If there is one thing I am certain of in my 30 years of life, I just had a birthday Wednesday, and I'm now at that stage of life where apparently you can pull a muscle just by sleeping wrong. Like, I do have to stretch before bed. I'm a professional sleeper. I've been doing it since I was little, and all of a sudden the whole game changed. Like, oh man, what did I do? It's weird, right? And then, there's more beauty products year after year on the counter to try and make you look like what you want to look like or what you think you should look like. But if there's one thing that I hold true of these 37 years of life, somebody yelled at me last service when I said that. They're like, you don't get to start complaining about aches and pains yet, young man. I said, don't gatekeep the aches and pains, okay? We all have them. It's that worship is truly a lifestyle lived out beyond the walls of just this service. Everything we do in this service, we call it a worship service. From the moment we walk in the door to the moment we leave the door, we consider the worship service, every aspect of it, not just the singing, but the shaking of hands, the praying, even the fact that we give and we give back because we trust God. We reorient our lives with God so much so that every aspect of our lives starts to look like that. But the worship service ends, but the worship doesn't, because it is a lifestyle that is lived out well beyond these walls. A great example that we can look at for this is the early church. And in Acts 2, we get this. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day after day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their numbers those that were being saved. The early church presents this wonderful community, right? They've just received the Holy Spirit, and they're so grateful and thankful for the life that has changed in them. They are taking care of one another, and they have a sending type attitude where they gather and give praise to God and thanks to God and remember one another in prayer and in need, and then they go from their place and they scatter and they tell people about Jesus. The word used in the New Testament to describe the church is ekklesia. It's a Greek word, but it's not specific to the Bible or the scriptures. It's just a Greek word that kind of means a group of people set apart for a specific purpose. It was actually a governmental term at the time. And this is the word that they're using to describe their early church, that we are a group of people that has been set apart for a very specific purpose. Right? We're a little bit different than the world around us, and we gather to take care of each other in ways that the world doesn't take care of us and each other. And in that moment, when they realized the grace extended to them, that they could extend to others, their whole life reoriented around Jesus. It became a lifestyle of worship because it became less about them and more about us. It went from a me, self-centered, internal attitude, and it shifted completely outwards to the point where you saw in that verse where they started, some of them, eating at home before coming to their gathering, to their assembly. And that's because they realized they've got enough at home. They can eat and drink there and then come so that the people with less can have enough for them. So it was a complete shift in mindset. The grace that has been extended to them, they extend out to other people. See, the lifestyle of worship didn't start at the first note in their gathering. It started at the first step they took towards Jesus. It started in that lifestyle change that said, we are going to do whatever we can to live out how Jesus taught us to live, and that means loving the other, loving the unlovable, going to the edges of society and being there with them. God is sheer being itself, spirit. Those who worship him must do it out of their very being, their spirits, their true selves in adoration. Worshiping God with our entire being means a fundamental shift in how we act, how we respond, how we engage with not just the people here week after week, but every person we come across outside of this building. It not only celebrates, again, what God has brought us through, and we remember and we're thankful, but we're also remembering what God is currently doing in each and every one of our lives, in our community life, and in the world around us, and we want to be part because we're being invited to sing. We're being invited to be part of that song that has been being sung from the dawn of creation till now, the song that is written on our hearts, to be part of renewing and the renewal of all things here. Worship truly is living out your faith. There's no other way to live a lifestyle of worship than to follow the words and teachings of Jesus and live it out daily, day after day after day after day. Have you ever experienced something that just kind of shifted how you thought about something? So you experienced something that was so good or wonderful that you just couldn't help but tell other people about it. Like the first thing you did was you ran out and you're like, you've got to check this out. About 5 years ago, there was a restaurant that just opened up down at 88th and Wads, and it was called Lark Burger. And I like a good burger. I went, and I mean, it was one of the best fast food-ish burgers I'd ever had. It was perfectly medium rare. I was in love with a burger. So much so that I came back and I'm like, Brian, you've got to try this. I know you like burgers. That didn't seem as much of a dig as it did coming out right now. Like, I know you like burgers. I know he's watching too. Hi, Brian. You've got to try this. And so he came to Lark Burger with me. And then we invited his family. And then we invited the then youth pastor, Chris, and his family. And before you know it, we had what we called Lark Burger Wednesdays, where whatever staff could go and families could meet us, we'd go down to Lark Burger and we would eat. And it got to the point where I would walk into the place, and it was almost like walking into the bar on Cheers. It was like, Nate! And I realized I shouldn't have made that comparison with the bar here in church. I heard it when it came out, but it got to a point where I had brought so much business to them, they started giving me the employee discount for my meals. It was wonderful, but something fundamental in me went, this burger is phenomenal. I got to share this with other people. I got to tell them about what I've experienced. And this is a story we see over and over and over and over again in Scripture, where something happens and somebody encounters Jesus, and the next thing they do, that verse almost always says, and they went and told everybody they knew. Because when you reorient yourself and you worship something, your life changes and becomes about that. And when we experience Jesus and the grace and the sacrifice that was given to us that we receive, our lives change to the point where we can't help but let that enthusiastic bubble out where we're telling everybody about it. I pulled out 4 different examples in Scripture, and there's many more, but I wanted to focus in on these ones in particular. We're kind of zooming in right on that important part, and we don't get the whole context of every story, but it's important to see that this is a pattern. When people meet Jesus, they can't help but tell someone else. In Luke 5, we read this. Then Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, I do choose. This guy asked, if you so choose, would you heal me? I do choose. Be made clean. Immediately the leprosy left him. And Jesus ordered him to tell no one. Go, he said, and show yourself to the priest, and as Moses commanded, make an offering for your cleansing for a testimony to them. But now, more than ever, the word about Jesus spread abroad. Many crowds would gather to hear him and to be cured of their diseases. What we have here is this man who had leprosy comes to Jesus to be healed. And when you have leprosy, you are more than an outcast. You are shunned. People can't go near you. They can't touch you. You are not welcome into a worship service. You're not welcome into the temple. And when Jesus healed him, instead of this man jumping up and going to tell everybody, Jesus said, don't do that. But just go to the temple and worship. Make a sacrifice to God. This one thing that you haven't been able to do for your entire life. Reorient yourself around this lifestyle of worship. Be clean and go. And even though he told no one, everybody saw and word spread. In John chapter 4, we read this. Many Samaritans from that city believed in him because of the woman's testimony. This is the story of the woman at the well. And Jesus comes to her and talks to her. And it was kind of a scandalous story because men didn't do that with women in that particular era in society. You were pushed off. This is the woman that had a number of different husbands. But generally when we hear that story, or when we tell that story, we're always putting the blame on the woman. And Jesus doesn't necessarily do that. We're reading into it beyond. Because women at that time had no power. Zero power. The men could do whatever they wanted, and her having 5 husbands doesn't necessarily mean anything about her. It could mean each one of those husbands just kicked her to the side or passed away. And we're so quick to point that blame, and Jesus comes up to her and says, it's okay. I can give you living water. There's a different way. And we read many Samaritans from that city believed in him because of this woman's testimony. What a scandalous thing to say at this time, that this woman went out and told people what she had experienced. A person that has no voice, that is considered one of the lower ends of the society, goes out and tells people what happened, and lives are changed. He told me everything I have ever done. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with him. And he stayed there for 2 days, and many more believed because of his word. This woman's life was changed. She went out and told the whole city. This woman without a voice necessarily went out and told the whole city. And they went to Jesus and said, can you stay longer? We need more. They've reoriented their lives. People were saved. People were changed because of that experience that they had and that grace that was extended beyond all understanding. In Luke, we read this. Jesus stood still and ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, what do you want me to do for you? He said, Lord, let me see again. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has saved you. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him, glorifying God, and all the people, when they saw it, praised God. This blind man had an experience with Jesus, and he couldn't help but glorify God and be thankful and grateful for what he had been brought through. And because of that, his testimony, people saw it, and they started believing and joining in and reorienting their lives around this man named Jesus that turned everything upside down. But it didn't just stop with encounters directly with Jesus. When Jesus passed on the church to the apostles in their teaching, we read this in Acts, Peter said, I have no silver or gold, but what I have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, stand up and walk. And he took him by the right hand and raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles were made strong. Jumping up, he stood and began to walk, and he entered the temple with them, walking and leaping and praising God. All the people saw him walking and praising God, and they recognized him as the one who used to sit and ask for alms, or the one who used to beg outside of the beautiful gate of the temple. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at what had happened to him. For each one of these people, a lifestyle of worship happened at the moment they decided to reorient themselves around this man named Jesus, where they took that first step towards, I have leprosy, I can't see, I am lame, there's only one way out of this. I need Jesus more than anything. Their lifestyle of worship became at that moment that they said, yes, Jesus, I trust you, and moved on toward that. And when that miraculous thing happened for them, when they met Jesus and when they understood the gravity of what changed in their life, they were unable to contain the enthusiasm. And it just bubbled out into song, into dance, into leaping. It turned into praise to where people saw and went, something is fundamentally different about them. One of the best ways that we as a church remember that grace and that mercy extended to us, we take communion, we take Eucharist, we take the Lord's Supper. It is a means of grace. This is a way of us remembering the grace extended to us, because we can't give away to those outside these walls that which we have not received. So we remember the grace that has been extended to us, so that after we gather, we scatter to tell the world about what's happening. So we're going to do that here in service in just a moment. The band's going to come out. We're going to sing one more song together during. And I want you to know a few things. One, just logistical reasons. All of our communion bread is gluten-free. It just makes it easier. So if anybody has any issues, it's all gluten-free. And I'm going to invite you guys to, when you're comfortable, come receive the elements. You can come and pick up a piece of bread and remember that this is the body broken for you. And take a cup and remember that this is the blood spilled out for you. And you can receive those elements whenever you want in the next little bit of service. You can come down to the altar and pray and go back to your seat, stand and sing, whatever makes you comfortable. Now, we're not a church that always does communion every single week, which is a great reminder of the grace that we've been given. But one of the words we use when we talk about Eucharist or the Lord's Supper is the word communion. And it means to commune, or in a sense, to join in community with. So each and every week, we have an opportunity when we gather in this place, in fellowship and in community, to be reminded that a lifestyle of worship reorients ourselves around this man named Jesus, so that when we scatter out of this place, we can't help but sing a new song. We can't help but join in with creation, the song that has been being sung since the beginning of time. So as we sing this next song, whenever you are ready, you can make your way down, you can receive the elements, and you can take them at any time you want during this next song. So may we remember that the song that is written on our heart from the beginning of time is a song that we are invited into participating with. May we remember that as we gather as one large family and community and sing songs together and reorient our lives around this man named Jesus, that something happens beyond just a connection, but physically changes us. Our heartbeats begin to line up. We become one. And may we remember in this act of receiving grace and receiving communion, that as we reorient our lives around Jesus, that our hope is our heartbeat synchronizes and becomes one with the heartbeat of God.